He's mentally sick, my daughter's voice sliced through the courtroom sharp enough to make strangers flinch. She stood confident at the petitioner's table, perfectly dressed, while I sat alone, silent, accused, already judged. The judge didn't interrupt. He studied me carefully, then glanced at a sealed federal file resting on his desk. He leaned forward, his tone dangerously calm. "Miss Sullivan," he said, "do you truly understand who your father really is?" Her attorney stiffened. My daughter's face drained of color, and in that instant, her entire case began to fall apart. "I'm really thankful you're still here with me. Before the story continues, drop a comment below and tell me where are you watching from and what time is it right now in your part of the world. After the video ends, please give it a score from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps me grow and tell these stories in a way that serves you better. One last note before we continue: this story includes fictional elements crafted for storytelling and learning. While some details are adapted, the message is meant to be meaningful and useful. The room smelled like old oak and stale coffee. Courtroom 506 in the Cook County Courthouse, high ceilings, wood-paneled walls, the kind of place where justice was supposed to happen. I sat at the defendant's table wearing the gray suit Elizabeth had bought me 10 years ago. Navy tie, polished shoes. I looked like a man who had his life together. But according to my daughter, I was falling apart. Natalie sat across the aisle at the petitioner's table. 36 years old. Black blazer hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked perfect, natural makeup, not a strand out of place. The kind of daughter any father would be proud of. Except she was here to destroy me. Next to her sat Charles Mitchell, her attorney. 54, silver hair, deep voice. The kind of lawyer who could make a lie sound like scripture. He'd been talking for 20 minutes, laying out his case like he was reading a grocery list. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, gesturing toward me, "Mr. Sullivan has exhibited severe cognitive decline over the past 3 months. Memory loss, disorientation, hallucinations. His own physician has diagnosed him with early-stage dementia." I didn't move, didn't speak. Just sat there, hands folded on the table, watching. Mitchell continued. "He forgets where he lives, talks to people who aren't there. Last week, a neighbor found him wandering State Street at 2 a.m. in his pajamas, Your Honor. He couldn't remember his own address," the courtroom murmured. I caught a few reporters scribbling notes in the back row. This would make a good story. Retired tax consultant loses his mind. Daughter forced to intervene. If only they knew the truth. Mitchell turned to Natalie. "Ms. Sullivan, can you describe your father's behavior?" Natalie stood slowly, like she was walking to her own execution. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Your Honor, I don't want to do this, but I have to." She looked at me. Tears welled up in her eyes. For a moment, I almost believed her. "He's mentally unwell," she said, voice breaking. "He talks to my mother. She passed away 3 years ago. He forgets where he is. Last week, I found him standing in the kitchen at 4 a.m, making breakfast for someone who wasn't there. He thought Mom was still alive." The room went silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Natalie wiped her eyes. "I love my father, but he's not safe anymore. He needs help. Professional help. And I can't watch him hurt himself." I wanted to stand up, wanted to shout that every word was a lie, but I didn't. Because there was a plan. And the plan required patience. I looked up at the judge's bench. Judge Samuel Pierce presided over this circus. 58 years old, salt and pepper hair, stern face. He'd been reading the case file when I walked in, hadn't looked at me yet. But now he did. His eyes met mine. And for just a second, maybe less, his expression changed. Surprise. Recognition. He remembers. I'd seen that look before. 24 years ago. July 1998. Lakeshore Drive. A car accident. Fire. An 8-year-old girl trapped in the back seat screaming. Her father unconscious in the front. I'd been the one to pull her out, 30 seconds before the car exploded. That little girl was Melissa Pierce. And the man sitting on the bench wearing black robes holding a gavel was her father. Judge Pierce blinked, looked back down at his file. But I knew. He'd recognized me. And he was choosing to stay silent. Smart man. Mitchell wrapped up his argument. Your Honor, we're requesting an emergency conservatorship. Mr. Sullivan is unable to manage his own affairs. His daughter is prepared to assume responsibility for his care and well-being. Judge Pierce set down the file, looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, do you understand the charges against you? I stood. My voice was steady, calm. Yes, Your Honor. I understand perfectly. Judge Pierce studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. This court will reconvene in 1 week. I need time to review the evidence. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room erupted, reporters, talking people, standing footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Natalie sat frozen at her table, staring straight ahead. She didn't look at me. Not once. I gathered my things, slipped the manila folder into my briefcase, buttoned my suit jacket. As I walked past Natalie's table, I caught a glimpse of her face. She looked tired, scared, but not guilty. Good, I thought. She doesn't know what's coming. I walked out of that courtroom and felt the weight of 47 stares pressing into my back. Natalie didn't look at me. Judge Pierce had recognized me, I was certain, but he'd said nothing. Outside, the May wind cut through my suit. Chicago felt colder than it had in years. I pulled my coat tight and descended the courthouse steps. Somewhere behind me, my daughter was plotting my end, and somewhere ahead, a plan was forming. I just had to survive long enough to see it through. But first, I needed to remember how this nightmare began. 3 months earlier, I didn't know my daughter was involved with criminals. It was a Monday morning in February, cold, gray, ordinary. The kind of morning where Chicago felt more like a black and white photograph than a city. I sat in my office on West Adams Street reviewing tax returns when I saw the name that changed everything. I should have seen it coming. 26 years as an FBI agent taught me to notice patterns, anomalies, red flags. But I'd missed the biggest one, my own daughter's company buried in a stack of client files on my desk. Morrison Development Group, LLC, CEO Natalie Sullivan. My office was small, 3rd floor of a worn-down building in the Loop. The sign outside read, Sullivan Tax Consulting, since 2020. I'd opened it after retiring from the bureau. 35 years chasing money launderers, corrupt bankers, white-collar criminals. Then one day, I turned 62, and they handed me a gold watch and a pension. Told me I'd earned my rest. But I wasn't built for rest, so I kept working, quietly, off the books. The office was a cover away to keep my ear to the ground, track financial crimes, feed intel to the bureau when something big crossed my desk. My handler was Special Supervisory Agent Diane Foster at the FBI Chicago field office. Diane was 52, sharp as a blade, and one of the best financial crimes investigators I'd ever worked with. We'd been partners for 15 years before I officially retired. She knew I couldn't walk away from the work, so she kept me on as a consultant, unofficial, unpaid, and completely off the record. Most days, I'd wake at 5:30, make coffee, read the Tribune, drive downtown and spend 8 hours reviewing spreadsheets and tax forms for clients who thought I was just another accountant. They didn't know I was looking for patterns, anomalies, the little inconsistencies that separate legitimate business from criminal enterprise. The apartment in Pilsen was too quiet now. Elizabeth had been gone 3 years, passed away in March 2019. We didn't talk about what took her. She just slipped away one afternoon, like she'd been holding on until she couldn't anymore. The house still smelled like her coffee in the mornings. I'd catch myself setting out 2 mugs instead of 1. Work helped. It gave me something to focus on besides the empty chair at the breakfast table. Natalie didn't call much. Once, maybe twice a month. We'd had coffee 6 months ago at a place in River North. She'd looked tired, distracted, told me she was busy with her real estate company, but didn't say much about it. I didn't push. We'd grown distant after Elizabeth died. Maybe that was on me. Maybe I'd spent too many years chasing bad guys and not enough time being a father. She'd divorced 2 years ago. No kids. She never talked about it, and I didn't ask. That's the Sullivan way, keep your pain to yourself. That Monday morning, I was reviewing a new client file. Morrison Development Group, LLC. Registered address 150 North Riverside Plaza. I almost missed it. Would have if the CEO's name hadn't jumped off the page. Natalie Sullivan. I stared at the screen. My daughter had never mentioned owning a development company. Never mentioned Morrison. I pulled up their website, professional polished. Luxury condos, high-end commercial real estate. The kind of portfolio that takes years to build. Then I looked at the numbers. $500,000 a month moving through the accounts. Wire transfers from companies I didn't recognize, Apex Capital LLC. Riverside Holdings. Blue Water Investments. I cross-referenced the addresses. Delaware, Cayman Islands, Panama. My chest tightened. Shell companies, offshore accounts, high-volume wire transfers with no clear business purpose. I'd seen this pattern 1,000 times. It was textbook money laundering, but this was my daughter. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen. Tried to think of legitimate explanations. Real estate deals. International investors. Maybe she was just expanding her business. Maybe I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But the numbers didn't lie. And neither did the pattern. I opened my desk drawer. Pulled out a burner phone I kept for emergencies. There was only one number programmed in it, Diane's direct line. I hadn't called it in 2 years. I picked up the phone and dialed. It rang twice before she answered. Foster. Her voice was clipped professional. The same tone I'd heard 1,000 times during stakeouts and early morning briefings. Diane, I said quietly. It's Vernon. I need your help. Silence. Then, what's wrong? I looked at the screen again. Morrison Development Group. 500,000. Cayman Islands. I think my daughter is laundering money, I said. The line went quiet. When Diane spoke again, her voice was different. Careful. The voice she used when a case just got personal. Vernon, where are you right now? 2 days later, I met Diane at a coffee shop in River North. She'd chosen the location, public, crowded, anonymous. The kind of place where nobody remembers faces. Intelligentsia Coffee on West Jackson was packed at 3 in the afternoon. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled behind the counter. Laptop screens glowed at every table. Young professionals talked deals and deadlines over lattes and cold brew. Perfect cover. Just 2 more people having a business meeting. Diane Foster hadn't changed in the 2 years since I'd officially retired. Same sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Same crisp blazer charcoal today and no-nonsense posture. She slid into the booth across from me and set down a manila folder. No FBI seal, no markings. Just notes. Vernon, she said without preamble. You're playing with fire. I'd ordered an espresso. She had black tea. Neither of us touched our drinks. She opened the folder, pulled out a few sheets of paper. Handwritten notes. No photos. Nothing that could be traced back to the bureau. We can't be seen together too often, she said quietly. This is off the books. I nodded. I'd expected that. Diane leaned forward, keeping her voice low beneath the coffee shop noise. Morrison Development Group is one of 15 shell companies we're tracking. They're all connected to a larger network, a money laundering operation, moving 50 to 60 million a year through Chicago real estate. 50 million. I'd known it was big, but hearing the number out loud made my chest tighten. At the center of it, Diane continued, is Apex Capital LLC, run by a man named Luca Moretti. She slid a sheet across the table, a name, an address, a date of birth. Luca Moretti, 45 years old, CEO of Apex Capital, Chicago native, and according to Diane's notes, laundering money for a criminal organization I'd spent half my career trying to dismantle. Does that name sound familiar? Diane asked. I looked at the name again. Moretti. Tony Moretti. The memory hit me like cold water. Hatutiuhund. Tony Moretti, I said slowly. November 1999. Racketeering and wire fraud. We took him down after an 18-month investigation. He got 25 years. Diane nodded. Luca is his son. He was 22 when you arrested his father. He watched federal agents drag Tony out of his house in handcuffs, and he blamed you. I set the paper down. Where's Luca been since then? Prison. He got picked up in 2005 for assault and conspiracy. Served 15 years. Got out in 2020. Since then, he's been rebuilding his father's network. Smarter, quieter, more dangerous. She paused. Met my eyes. Luca knows who you are, Vernon. He's been looking for you. I felt the cold creep up my spine. And now he's found me. Through Natalie. Diane didn't answer right away. She glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening. Then she leaned in. Your daughter's company has been moving money for Moretti for at least 2 years. $6 million annually through fake condo projects. We've been tracking the wire transfers, Cayman Islands, Panama, Delaware, LLCs. It's textbook laundering. Is she complicit or coerced? I asked. We don't know, Diane said. That's what we're trying to figure out. If she's a willing participant, she's going to prison. If she's being blackmailed or threatened. She trailed off. We need more evidence, communications, testimony. If we move now, Luca disappears and your daughter takes the fall alone. I sat back. Thought about Natalie. Thought about the last time I'd seen her 6 months ago at that coffee shop. She'd looked tired. Scared even. I'd chalked it up to the divorce, but maybe it was something else. Let me go undercover, I said. Diane's eyes narrowed. Vernon! I'll get close to Natalie. Find out if she's being coerced. Gather evidence from the inside. You're retired, Diane said flatly. And she's your daughter. You can't be objective. Hound, that's exactly why I have to do this, I said. If she's innocent, I'll prove it. If she's guilty... I stopped, swallowed. If she's guilty, I'll do what's right. Diane studied me for a long moment. Then she closed the folder and stood. Luca Moretti is dangerous, she said. He's not like his father. Tony was a businessman, cold, calculated. Luca is different. More volatile, more personal. If he finds out you're investigating him, he'll come after you. And he won't hesitate. I nodded. I understand. Diane placed her hand on my shoulder. Because last I checked, you're 64 years old and 2 years out of the field. She slid a business card across the table. On it was a phone number, nothing else. Handwritten, untraceable. Oh, call me if you need anything, she said. And Vernon. She paused at the door, looked back. Be careful. Luca has eyes everywhere. I watched her leave, picked up the card, slipped it into my wallet, finished my espresso. Outside, the February wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in this city, Luca Moretti was waiting, and somewhere closer, my daughter was hiding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. 3 weeks passed. I watched Natalie from a distance, surveillance photos. Diane provided bank records, phone logs. Nothing concrete, Just patterns. Wire transfers every Friday. Meetings with men in expensive suits. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was her. Her voice was soft, almost tentative. I hadn't heard her call me that in months. I was thinking, would you like to come over for dinner this Saturday? I miss you. I should have said no. Every instinct screamed trap. But she was my daughter. And part of me, foolish hopeful, wanted to believe she was innocent. I told Diane about the invitation. We met briefly at a parking garage off Roosevelt Road. She wasn't happy. I wear a wire, she said. Not yet. I need to see if she's genuine first. Diane pulled a small pill from her jacket pocket. At least take this. Antidote. If you feel dizzy or disoriented, take it immediately. I looked at the pill. You think she'll drug me? I think Luca will. And your daughter might not have a choice. I slipped the pill into my shirt pocket. Saturday evening, I drove to Lincoln Park. Natalie's building was glass and steel, 15 stories overlooking Lake Michigan. The kind of place that cost more per month than most people made in a year. I'd never asked how she afforded it. Maybe I should have. She opened the door wearing a simple black sweater dress, hair down around her shoulders. She smiled the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. Birthdays, graduations, her wedding day. Dad, I'm so glad you came. I hugged her. Felt her body stiffen slightly. Just for a second. Then she relaxed and hugged me back. The apartment was modern. White leather sofa, glass coffee table, abstract art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights stretching toward the darkening sky. The sunset painted everything orange and gold. From the kitchen came the smell of butternut squash soup. Elizabeth's recipe. I recognized it immediately. I learned from Mom's old cookbook, Natalie said, leading me to the dining table. Do you like it? It's perfect, I said. But my mind was cataloging every detail. The expensive furniture, the view, the way she moved around the kitchen like she owned the world, or like she was trying very hard to pretend she did. She served dinner. Butternut squash soup, toasted bread, a bottle of Merlot. I ate the soup sweet, creamy, exactly like Elizabeth used to make. For a moment, I was 20 years younger, sitting at our old kitchen table watching my wife laugh at something Natalie said. Then I tasted the wine, slightly bitter at the back of my throat. How's work, Dad? Natalie asked. Are you still doing tax consulting? Yes. Busy season now. Tax deadlines in April. Do you work every day? Most days. Why? I just worried about you. You're 64 now. You should rest more. I noticed the way she asked. Not casual, deliberate. What time do you leave the office? Do you drive or take the train? She was mapping my routine. She refilled my wine glass. Dad, you barely touched it. I drank, tried to look relaxed. But my pulse was climbing. Dad, she said, setting down her fork. Have you been feeling okay lately? So fine. Why? Mrs. Harris called me last week. She said you looked tired. I froze. You talked to Evelyn. She's worried about you, so am I. Evelyn Harris, my neighbor in Pilsen. 72 years old. Sweet woman. Always asking if I needed anything. I hadn't realized she and Natalie were in contact. I'm fine, Natalie, just busy. Natalie looked at me. Her eyes were hard to read. Concerned. Or calculating. Promise me you'll see a doctor if you feel anything unusual, she said. Dizziness, confusion, memory problems. Why would she say that? Unless she knew something. I stayed until 9, thanked her for dinner. She hugged me at the door, tighter this time, almost desperate. I love you, Dad. I love you too, I said. My voice caught. I drove home. The city lights blurred past the windshield. My head felt heavy, hands trembling slightly when I gripped the steering wheel. I pulled over on Halsted Street, sat in the dark for a few minutes. Just stress, or the wine. I made it home by 10. The apartment was dark and cold. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat on the couch, still wearing my coat, and stared at nothing. My head felt like it was full of cotton. My hands shook when I reached for my phone to text Diane. Made it home, nothing suspicious. But before I hit send, I noticed something. My wallet was on the coffee table. I always keep it in my pocket. Always. I'm obsessive about it. 35 years as an agent trained me to never let my ID out of my sight. I didn't remember taking it out. The room tilted. And then for just a moment, I couldn't remember where I'd parked my car. 5 days after that dinner, I started forgetting things. Small things at first. Where I'd left my keys. The name of a client I'd worked with for months. The route home from the grocery store. I told myself it was nothing. Just fatigue. But on Thursday morning, I woke up and couldn't remember what day it was. I stared at the calendar on my kitchen wall, March 10th, 2022, and the numbers felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. That's when I knew something was wrong. I went through my usual routine. 5:30 wake up. Coffee. Tribune. But when I reached for the coffee grounds, I couldn't remember how many scoops I'd already added. 2-3. I stared at the filter trying to recall. Nothing. I sat at the table and opened the newspaper. Read the same paragraph 3 times. Still couldn't tell you what it said. I needed to get to the office. Had a meeting at 10 with a client. I grabbed my coat, reached for my car keys. They weren't on the hook by the door. I checked the kitchen counter, the dining table, the nightstand. Nothing. My heart started pounding. I'd had those keys for 12 years. Same keychain, a small FBI badge Elizabeth had given me as a retirement gift. I never misplaced them. I found them 20 minutes later, in the refrigerator, next to the milk. I stood there holding the cold metal, trying to understand how I'd put my car keys in the fridge. Had I been distracted? Had I set them down without thinking, but I couldn't remember. Couldn't picture the moment it happened. I made it to the office by 10:15. Late. I'm never late. My client was already there. Ronald Carter, 51 years old, branch manager at First National Bank. We'd been working together for 6 months on his corporate taxes. Nice guy. Reliable. Good morning, Agent Sullivan. He stopped, smiled awkwardly. Sorry, I meant Mr. Sullivan. I froze. Agent Sullivan. Why had he called me that? Had I told him I used to be FBI, I couldn't remember. 35 years of training taught me to keep my past quiet. But maybe I'd slipped. Maybe the cover was cracking. Good morning, Ron, I said, trying to sound normal. We sat down. He started talking about quarterly projections, tax deductions, depreciation schedules. I nodded along, took notes. But halfway through, I had to ask him to repeat something we'd already discussed last week. He looked at me, concern flickering across his face. Mr. Sullivan, are you feeling all right? Yes, I said. Just a little tired. He didn't look convinced. By 5:30, I was done. Closed the office, drove toward home. The route was muscle memory, West Adams to Roosevelt, to Halsted, into Pilsen. I'd driven it 1,000 times, but when I reached the intersection at Roosevelt and Halsted, I stopped. Couldn't remember which way to turn. Left, right. I sat at the light cars honking behind me, pulled out my phone, opened Google Maps. The blue dot showed I was 2 miles from home. 2 miles. I'd lived in Pilsen for 15 years. I should know this. I made it home eventually. Parked on the street. Sat in the dark car for a long time, hands gripping the wheel. My mother had dementia. Started at 85, but I was only 64. Too young, too soon. What's happening to me? I climbed out of the car, walked toward my building. That's when I saw her. Mrs. Evelyn Harris stood on the front steps of the brownstone next door, watering her plants. 72 years old, silver hair pulled back in a bun cardigan sweater despite the cold. She'd been my neighbor for 10 years. Always kind. Always checking in. The kind of woman who'd bring you soup if you were sick and never ask for anything in return. Vernon, she called. I've been trying to call you. Oh, sorry, Evelyn, I've been busy. She set down the watering can and walked over her face lined with worry. Are you okay, dear? You look pale. And yesterday, I saw you standing in the hallway for 10 minutes, just staring at your door. I didn't remember that. I don't remember that. Her expression softened. Pity, maybe. Or fear. Vernon, maybe you should see a doctor. My husband had symptoms like this before. She stopped herself. I knew what she was going to say. Her husband, Frank, had passed away 5 years ago. Alzheimer's. I'm fine, Evelyn, I said gently. Really, just tired from work. She nodded, but she didn't believe me. If you need anything, you call me. Okay, I will, thank you. I went inside, closed the door, leaned against it. My hands were shaking. I took off my coat, reached into the pocket for my phone. My fingers touched something else. Something small and hard. I pulled it out. A pill bottle. Orange plastic. No label. Inside were 5 or 6 white pills. I stared at it. I didn't remember putting this in my pocket. Didn't recognize the pills. Didn't know where they'd come from. Had Natalie given me this? I thought back to Saturday night. Dinner, wine, conversation. But after that, everything was fragments. The drive home, the couch, my wallet on the table. Had she slipped this into my coat? Or had I picked it up somewhere and forgotten? I set the bottle on the kitchen counter, walked to the bathroom, turned on the light, looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back looked older, tired, confused. For the first time in 64 years, I didn't recognize myself. And that terrified me more than any criminal I'd ever chased. 8 days passed, and the confusion didn't fade. It settled in quiet and persistent, like something that had found a place to live. I sat at my desk on a Friday morning, staring at a tax return on my computer screen while the numbers blurred together. They ran into each other like watercolor in the rain. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, pressed my palms against my face, then looked up and froze. Elizabeth stood in the doorway. She wore the navy cardigan I'd bought her for our 30th anniversary, the one with the pearl buttons she loved. Her hair was dark again, untouched by the gray that had begun to appear before she got sick. She smiled at me, the same soft, knowing smile that used to make everything feel manageable. Vernon, she said gently, you're working too hard again. I stood so fast, my chair scraped the floor. I reached for her, my chest tight, my throat closing, but she vanished. The doorway was empty. The hall beyond was silent. My hands shook as I sat back down and gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to breathe. It wasn't real. She wasn't real. Elizabeth had been gone for 3 years. I knew that. The fact that I'd forgotten terrified me more than anything Luca Moretti could ever do. By noon, I'd missed a client meeting someone I'd been working with for 6 months. He called twice and left a voicemail asking if I was okay. I had no memory of the appointment. When I checked my calendar there, it was written in my own hand, 12 p.m., James Rivera, Q1 review. I called him back, apologized, rescheduled for Monday, and blamed the flu. He was understanding, but his concern was obvious. You sure you're all right, Mr. Sullivan? I lied and said yes. I wasn't all right. I was losing time, losing pieces of myself. And I didn't know how to stop it. That evening, I went home early, skipped dinner, and sat in the dark living room with a glass of water I never drank. The apartment felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I replayed the hallucination again and again, Elizabeth's face, her voice, the way she said my name. I wanted to call Diane, to tell her everything, but if I admitted I was seeing things, she'd pull me off the case. She'd have to. And I couldn't let that happen, not with Natalie tangled up in Moretti's world. So I sat in the dark, convincing myself I was fine until the phone rang. It was Mrs. Harris. "Vernon, dear, I hope I'm not bothering you," she said gently. "I saw you come home early today and you didn't look well. Are you feeling okay?" I told her I was tired. She didn't believe me. "I know you," she said. "You don't slow down unless something's wrong." "Have you seen a doctor?" I deflected, thanked her, promised I'd take care of myself. After we hung up, I stared at the phone, wondering how much she'd noticed. How much everyone had noticed. 2 hours later, it rang again. This time it was Natalie. "Dad," she said, her voice tight. "Mrs. Harris called me. She's worried about you. She says you've been forgetting things, getting lost." My chest tightened. I hadn't known she had Natalie's number. "I'm fine," I said. "Just a busy week." "Don't do that," Natalie said, her voice cracking. "I saw it too. You forgot where you parked. You left your wallet at my place. That's not you." She was right, and I had nothing to argue with. "I think you need to see a doctor," she said. "Just to check. Will you do that?" For me, I closed my eyes and nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I promise." Relief flooded her voice. "I'll call tomorrow to make sure." "I love you." "I love you too." After the call, I sat in the dark a long time, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, I called a clinic in Gold Coast and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. I told the receptionist I'd been having memory issues, nothing serious, just concerns. She booked me with Dr. Alan Prescott, a neurologist with over 20 years of experience. At 2 o'clock, I sat in a pale blue waiting room, watching a clock tick too loudly. When the nurse called my name, I followed her into an exam room that smelled like antiseptic and uncertainty. Dr. Prescott arrived minutes later. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, calm eyes. He listened as I described the forgetfulness and confusion. I didn't mention Elizabeth. I didn't mention the pills. I didn't mention Moretti. He ran cognitive tests. I stumbled. He noticed. When he finished, he folded his hands and met my gaze. "Mr. Sullivan," he said carefully, "what you're describing could be early-stage dementia." The word hit me like a freight train. "How soon can we know?" I asked. "With an MRI and blood work," he said. "About a week." I agreed to everything and walked out feeling like the ground beneath me was gone. Monday afternoon, Natalie drove me to Dr. Prescott's office in a building that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet money that didn't need to announce itself. She waited in the lobby with her phone and a cup of coffee while I took the elevator to the 8th floor alone. The receptionist smiled at me like she'd been trained to check me in and led me down a hallway that smelled faintly of lavender and leather. Dr. Alan Prescott was younger than I'd expected, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice so calm it could have talked someone off a ledge. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, and I sat. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, folding his hands on top of a yellow legal pad. "Your daughter told me you've been experiencing some difficulties. Memory lapses, confusion, disorientation. Why don't you walk me through what's been happening?" So I did. I told him about the keys in the refrigerator, the client meeting. I'd completely forgotten the drive home where I couldn't remember which street I lived on. And then, because he asked, and because I didn't know what else to do, I told him about Elizabeth. About seeing her in the doorway of my office, hearing her voice reaching for her before she disappeared like smoke. "Did you believe she was real?" he asked, his pen pausing over the notepad. I swallowed hard. "No, I knew she wasn't. But in that moment, it felt real. More real than anything else." He wrote something down, nodded slowly. "Is there any family history of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia?" "My mother," I said quietly. "She had Alzheimer's. Diagnosed at 85. Died 2 years later." He made another note, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe, or pity. I wasn't sure which was worse. I'd like to run a few cognitive tests, he said, setting the pad aside. Nothing invasive, just some exercises to get a baseline. I nodded, and he walked me through them. First, he gave me 3 words to remember apple table penny, and told me he'd ask me to repeat them later. Then he handed me a blank sheet of paper and asked me to draw a clock showing 10:15. I drew the circle, added the numbers, placed the hands where I thought they belonged. When I handed it back, he studied it for a moment, then set it face down on the desk. Now, he said, I'd like you to count backward from 100 by sevens. I started. 100, 93, 86, 79, 72. My brain felt sluggish, like I was wading through mud. 65, 58. I paused, hesitated. He waited. 51. I finished, but I could tell from the look on his face that I'd taken too long. Good, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Now can you repeat those 3 words I gave you earlier? I closed my eyes, reached for them. Apple. That one came easy. Table. That one too. But the 3rd word, I couldn't find it. I sat there in silence, my jaw tight, my hands clenched in my lap, and finally shook my head. 2 out of 3, I said. He wrote that down. The word was penny, he said gently. I felt something crack inside me. Dr. Prescott set his pen down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me with the kind of careful, measured expression doctors use when they're about to deliver bad news. Mr. Sullivan, he said slowly, based on your symptoms and the results of these tests, I believe you're experiencing early-stage dementia, potentially accompanied by paranoid hallucinations. The words landed like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. Dementia. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm 64 years old. Early-onset dementia can occur in patients as young as their 50s, he said, his tone professional, clinical. It's not common, but it's not unheard of, especially with a family history like yours. He pulled out a prescription pad, scribbled something I couldn't read from where I sat, tore off the sheet, and handed it to me. I'm prescribing a mild sedative to help manage the hallucinations. It should also help with the anxiety and confusion. Take 1 tablet at night with food. We'll schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks to monitor your progress. I looked down at the prescription. The handwriting was nearly illegible, but I could make out part of the drug name, something ending in done. I folded it, slipped it into my pocket, and stood. Thank you, doctor, I said, my voice flat. He stood too, shook my hand, and walked me to the door. But as I stepped into the hallway, I heard his voice again, low, muffled, speaking to someone on the phone. I stopped. The door hadn't fully closed behind me. Yes, I've examined him, Prescott said quietly. The diagnosis is confirmed. He's exhibiting all the symptoms you described. A pause. No, he doesn't suspect anything. I'll send the report tonight. I felt my blood run cold. All the symptoms you described. Someone had told him what to find. Someone had choreographed this entire diagnosis. I didn't wait to hear more. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and rode down to the lobby in silence, my mind spinning. When I got home, I went straight to the refrigerator, pulled out the container of butternut squash soup Natalie had made for me 3 weeks ago, and carefully transferred a small sample into a plastic Ziploc bag. Then I picked up my phone and called Diane Foster. I need your lab to run a toxicology screen on this, I said when she answered. Check for risperidone, benzodiazepines, anything that could cause memory loss and hallucinations. Vernon, she said carefully. What's going on? I'll explain when I see you. Can you meet me tonight? 9 o'clock. Underground parking at the field office. I'll be there. At 9 o'clock sharp, I pulled into the dim concrete cavern beneath the FBI's Chicago field office on West Roosevelt Road. Diane was waiting near the elevator. Her arms crossed her expression somewhere between concerned and suspicious. I handed her the Ziploc bag. She held it up to the light, studied the faint orange liquid inside, then looked at me. This is going to take 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. I nodded. I can wait. She slipped the bag into her jacket pocket. Vernon, if someone's drugging you, this is bigger than money laundering. You understand that, right? I understand. She studied my face for a long moment, then sighed. Be careful. If Moretti's involved, he's not going to stop at soup. I know. I turned to leave, but she called after me. Vernon, for what it's worth, I don't think you're losing your mind. I looked back at her, managed a weak smile. Thanks, Diane. That means more than you know. I drove home through the dark, empty streets of Chicago, the city lights blurring in my rearview mirror, and thought about Dr. Prescott's phone call. He's exhibiting all the symptoms you described. Someone had given him a script. Someone had told him exactly what to say, what to find, what to diagnose. And as I pulled into my parking spot and killed the engine, I felt a cold, creeping certainty settle over me like a second skin. I knew who was pulling the strings. I just didn't want to believe it yet. But 3 days from now, when Diane called me with the lab results, I wouldn't have a choice. 3 days felt like 3 years. I barely slept. Every meal tasted like poison. Every call from Natalie felt like a trap I couldn't escape. I stopped answering her texts, stopped picking up when she called. And when she showed up at my apartment on Wednesday afternoon with groceries and concern in her eyes, I told her I was fine, just tired, just needed space. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way she looked at me, like I was something fragile, something broken. And maybe I was. But not in the way she thought. Then at 1:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, my burner phone buzzed on the nightstand. Diane's voice was low and urgent. Meet me. Now. Same place. I didn't ask questions. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and drove through the empty streets of Chicago to the parking garage on North Des Plaines. The same concrete cavern where we'd met 100 times before. Back when I was still active, back when the cases didn't involve my own blood. The garage was empty at 2 in the morning. Just me, a few scattered pillars, and the echo of my footsteps bouncing off cold concrete. Diane's black SUV pulled in a minute later. Headlights off, engine quiet. She stepped out holding a manila folder, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know before she opened her mouth. Vernon, she said, walking toward me. We need to talk. I nodded, swallowed hard, and waited. She handed me the folder. I opened it under the dim glow of a fluorescent light overhead. FBI Laboratory Analysis Report. Sample ID VS-032122. Substance detected. Risperidone 10 milligrams concentration. Side effects. Confusion, memory loss, hallucinations, tremors, disorientation. I stared at the words until they blurred. My hands were shaking. She drugged me, I said quietly, my voice barely holding steady. Someone did, Diane corrected. We don't know yet if it was Natalie or Luca. But this was deliberate, Vernon. Someone wanted you declared mentally incompetent. Why? I looked up at her, and for the first time in 35 years of working cases, I felt like the victim instead of the investigator. So Natalie could become your guardian, Diane said. Control your assets, your freedom, your credibility, and more importantly, so you'd stop being a threat. A threat to Moretti. Exactly. Diane pulled out a second folder, thicker this time, and handed it over. We've been surveilling Natalie for 6 months, she said. It was every Tuesday she meets Luca Moretti at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse in River North. Same table, same time. We've got photos. I flipped through them. Natalie sitting across from Luca, her face pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Luca leaning forward, speaking close to her ear, his expression cold and controlled. In one photo, Natalie's eyes were red like she'd been crying. In another, Luca's hand was on her wrist. She looks terrified, I said. She is, Diane replied. We intercepted a call last week. Luca's blackmailing her Vernon. He's got something on her, some kind of video, and he's using it to force her into the money laundering operation. She's not a criminal. She's a victim. I felt something crack open inside my chest. My daughter. My Natalie. I'd spent the last 3 weeks thinking she was the enemy, thinking she'd turned into someone I didn't recognize, but she hadn't. She was scared. She was trapped. And I hadn't seen it. What kind of video? I asked, my voice rough. Diane hesitated. We don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's bad enough that she's willing to risk everything to keep it hidden. I closed the folder, handed it back to her, and leaned against the concrete pillar behind me. My head was spinning, my heart pounding, and for a moment I didn't trust myself to speak. Luca knows who I am, I said finally. He knows you're FBI, Diane confirmed. He's been watching you for years, Vernon, ever since his father went to prison. This isn't just about money. It's about revenge. And Natalie's the weapon. Yes. I looked at Diane, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I knew exactly what I had to do. Let her take me to court, I said. Diane's eyes widened. Vernon. Let her file for guardianship. Let Prescott testify. Let Luca think he's won. I straightened my jaw, set my voice steady. And when the time is right, I'll expose everything. In open court. On the record. Where Luca can't touch me and Natalie can't be silenced. Diane studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're going to need evidence. Real evidence. Not just lab reports. I know. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. 6 months of surveillance, she said, handing it to me. Bank records, photos, recorded phone calls, timestamps. Everything we've got on Moretti's operation and Natalie's involvement. If you're really going to do this, you'll need this. I took the USB, closed my fist around it, and felt the weight of what I was about to do settle over me like a second skin. Thank you, Diane. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. If Moretti finds out what you're planning, he won't stop at drugs in your soup. He'll come for you. And he'll come for Natalie. I know. And you're doing this anyway. She's my daughter. Diane looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then be smart. Be careful. And whatever you do, don't let Prescott know you're onto him. I won't. Diane's SUV pulled away, taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving me alone in the cold. Empty garage with nothing but the USB drive in my hand, and a plan that felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of razors. Somewhere in this city, my daughter was being blackmailed by a man who wanted me destroyed. Somewhere a corrupt doctor was writing false diagnoses to make it all look legitimate. And somewhere a trap was closing, one that could save Natalie or bury us both. I walked back to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat in the silence for a long time, staring at the USB drive in my palm. The game had started, and I was 3 moves behind. But I'd been underestimated before. I'd survived worse odds. I just had to make sure I survived long enough to finish this. Because if I didn't, Natalie wouldn't either. 4 days later, the trap sprang shut. A process server showed up at my door at 10 in the morning with a thick manila envelope stamped Cook County Circuit Court in bold black letters. I signed for it, closed the door, and sat down at my kitchen table. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. The first page was typed in crisp, official legalese, the kind of language designed to strip away humanity and reduce a life to a case number. Petition for emergency conservatorship. The words jumped off the page. Petitioner Natalie Sullivan, respondent Vernon Sullivan. Grounds: severe cognitive decline, paranoid hallucinations, inability to care for himself or manage his financial affairs. Hearing date Monday, May 2nd, 2022. 9 a.m., courtroom 506, presiding Judge Samuel Pierce. 5 weeks. I had 5 weeks to prepare for the fight of my life. I flipped through the rest of the packet, my chest tightening with every page. There was a sworn affidavit from Dr. Alan Prescott, detailing my diagnosis of early-stage dementia with paranoid features complete with test results and clinical observations. There was a statement from Mrs. Evelyn Harris, my neighbor, describing how she'd found me confused and disoriented on multiple occasions, how I'd forgotten where I lived, how I'd seemed not myself for weeks. There was a deposition from Ronald Carter, the bank manager, recounting the meeting I'd missed, and the phone call where I'd sounded distant and confused. And then clipped to the back, there was a still image pulled from security footage, grainy, black and white, time-stamped 2:37 a.m., showing me standing alone in the middle of a sidewalk, staring at nothing. I didn't remember that night. I didn't know where that footage came from. But it didn't matter. To anyone reading this file, I looked exactly like what Natalie was claiming. I was a man losing his mind. The last page was a cover letter from Charles Mitchell, Esquire of Mitchell and Associates, a law firm specializing in elder law and conservatorship cases. I'd heard of him before. Sharp, ruthless, with an 87% win rate in contested guardianship hearings. He was expensive, professional, and very, very good at what he did. And he was representing my daughter. I set the papers down, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling. I could hire a lawyer. I had contacts, former colleagues, defense attorneys who owed me favors. But if I brought in counsel, if I started fighting back publicly, Luca would know. And if Luca knew I was fighting, he'd assume Natalie had told me something. He'd tighten his grip on her. Or worse. No. I had to do this alone. I had to play the part of the confused, vulnerable father right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. And then I'd burn it all down. I picked up my phone and called Diane. She answered on the second ring. "Vernon." "They're moving fast," I said, my voice low. "I just got served. Emergency conservatorship hearing, May 2nd. That's only 5 weeks. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you have a lawyer?" "No." "Vernon." "I can't, Diane. If I hire someone, if I start mounting a defense, Moretti will know something's up. I have to let this play out." "You're going to represent yourself?" "Yes." "That's a terrible idea." "It's the only idea I've got." She sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she always did when a case got complicated. "What do you need from me?" "Time," I said. "And silence. Don't make any moves on Moretti until after the hearing. Let him think he's won. And if the judge rules against you, if Natalie gets guardianship, then I'll appeal. Or I'll expose everything from inside whatever facility they put me in. But it won't come to that." "You sound awfully confident for someone who just got served." "I've been underestimated before." She was quiet again, then said, "Be careful, Vernon. You're playing a very dangerous game." "I know." I hung up, set the phone down, and stared at the stack of legal papers in front of me. That evening, I called Natalie. She picked up on the third ring, and her voice was small, shaky, like she'd been crying. "Dad, I got the papers," I said quietly. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to do this, but I don't know what else to do." "You're not okay, Dad. You're forgetting things, seeing things, and I'm terrified you're going to hurt yourself." Her voice cracked. "I can't lose you the way we lost Mom." I closed my eyes, felt the weight of her words settle over me like a shroud. She believed it. She really believed I was losing my mind. And maybe that was the worst part of all of this. Not that she was being used, but that she didn't even know it. "Nat," I said carefully, "I know you think you're helping me, but this isn't the answer." "Then what is?" she said, her voice rising. "Because I've tried everything. I've called you. I've visited, I've begged you to go to the doctor, and you just keep pushing me away. What am I supposed to do?" I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her about the risperidone, about Luca, about the USB drive sitting in my desk drawer, with enough evidence to destroy everything Moretti had built. But I couldn't. Not yet. "I'll see you in court," I said quietly. "Dad, I love you, Natalie. No matter what happens, I need you to know that." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not a will, I already had one of those. Not a confession, just a letter. A contingency plan. To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, it means I am dead missing or otherwise unable to speak for myself. My name is Vernon Sullivan. I am a retired FBI special agent. I am of sound mind. I have not lost my memory and I am not suffering from dementia. I have been systematically drugged with risperidone by persons unknown in an effort to discredit me and seize control of my assets and freedom. The attached USB drive contains evidence of a money laundering operation run by Luca Moretti involving my daughter Natalie Sullivan, who is being blackmailed and coerced. Dr. Alan Prescott, the physician who diagnosed me, is complicit in this scheme. His diagnosis is false. I have lab results from the FBI proving the presence of drugs in my system. If I do not survive this, please ensure this information reaches the Cook County State's Attorney and the FBI Chicago Field Office. Attention, SSA Diane Foster. Respectfully, Vernon Sullivan. I sealed the envelope, addressed it to Judge Samuel Pierce, and set it on my desk. If things went wrong, if Luca moved faster than I expected, if I didn't make it to the hearing, someone would find it. Someone would know. Outside, the March wind rattled my windows. Somewhere in this city, Natalie was preparing to take me to court. Somewhere Luca Moretti was watching. Somewhere the trap was tightening. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the skyline. Chicago's towers rising into the gray sky, indifferent and cold. I'd spent 26 years putting criminals behind bars. Now I had to prove I wasn't the one who belonged there. 5 weeks. That's all I had. 5 weeks to stay sane, stay sharp, and stay alive long enough to finish what I'd started. And if I couldn't do that, at least I'd leave a trail of breadcrumbs for someone else to follow. I just hoped it would be enough. The night before the hearing, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock on my nightstand tick away the hours. 11 became midnight. Midnight became 1. At 2, I gave up, got out of bed, and made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark, holding a photograph I'd pulled from the drawer. Natalie at 5 years old, wearing a pink dress, smiling so wide her eyes crinkled at the corners. It was her birthday party. Elizabeth had baked a chocolate cake from scratch, decorated it with frosting flowers, and let Natalie lick the spoon. I remembered that day so clearly, how I'd gotten down on my hands and knees and pretended to be a horse, carrying her around the tiny living room of our Pilsen apartment while she squealed with laughter. "Faster, Daddy, faster!" She'd shouted, her little hands gripping my shoulders. And I'd gone faster, even though my knees hurt and my back ached, because making her laugh was the only thing that mattered. Where did that little girl go? Where did I go wrong? I set the photo down and picked up another one. Natalie at 18, graduation day at Lincoln Park High School, June 2004. She stood between Elizabeth and me, wearing a cap and gown, holding her diploma with honors. Her smile was confident, proud, and just a little bit nervous. I got into Northwestern, Dad," she'd told me that afternoon, her voice shaking with excitement. Full academic scholarship. I'd hugged her so tight I thought I might break her. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo," I'd whispered into her hair. And I was. I was so damn proud. But I was also distracted. I'd been working a case, a fraud ring operating out of Cicero, and I'd missed half her senior year. Missed the choir concert, missed the college tours, missed the late-night talks she'd had with her mother, because I was always somewhere else chasing someone else's problems. I told myself I was doing it for her, for our family, to keep her safe. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was good at being an agent, and I wasn't sure I was good at being a father. I picked up a third photo. Natalie's wedding, May 2018. She wore a white dress that Elizabeth had helped her pick out, even though by then the cancer had spread to her lungs, and she could barely walk without getting winded. But Elizabeth had insisted. "I'm not missing this," she'd said, holding my arm as we walked into the church. Natalie had smiled when she saw us, and I saw tears in her eyes, happy tears, I'd thought. But now looking back, I wondered. Her marriage had lasted 2 years. The divorce was finalized in 2023, months after I retired from the bureau. She'd called me to tell me, her voice flat and distant. "It just didn't work out, Dad," she'd said. I hadn't pressed her. I should have, because somewhere in those 2 years, when she was vulnerable and alone, Luca Moretti had found her. And I hadn't been there to stop it. I set the photos down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. I'd spent 35 years putting bad people behind bars, convincing myself I was making the world safer for people like Natalie. But I'd been so focused on the world that I'd forgotten to protect the one person who mattered most. I couldn't save her by sacrificing justice. I had to save her with it. That was the only way this worked. That was the only way either of us got out of this alive. At 5 a.m, I stood, walked to the bathroom, and turned on the shower. I shaved, carefully combed my hair, and stared at my reflection for a long time. 64 years old, lines around my eyes, gray at my temples. I looked tired, but I didn't look crazy. I looked like a man who'd lived a hard life and wasn't done fighting yet. I walked to my closet and pulled out the navy suit I'd worn to Elizabeth's funeral, the only suit I owned that still fit. I put on a white shirt, a red tie, and polished black shoes. Then I opened the drawer of my desk and took out 2 things: the USB drive Diane had given me and my old FBI badge. The badge was worn, the edges scratched, the photo inside faded, but it was still mine. I slipped it into my jacket pocket along with the USB and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. "You're not crazy," I said out loud, my voice steady. "You're a federal agent, act like one." At 6:30, I grabbed my keys, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the knob. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. If I won, I'd save Natalie and take down Luca Moretti. If I lost, I'd spend the rest of my life in a medical facility, drugged and forgotten, while Natalie lived under Moretti's control and never knew the truth. I opened the door and stepped into the cold May morning. The city was waking up, joggers on the sidewalk, cars starting, the faint hum of the L train in the distance. Chicago looked the same as it always had. Indifferent, unforgiving, beautiful in its own hard-edged way. I got into my car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment staring at the steering wheel. In 3 hours, I'd walk into courtroom 506 and face my daughter, her lawyer, a corrupt doctor, and a judge I hadn't seen in 24 years. And I'd do it alone. No backup. No lawyer. No safety net. Just me, the truth, and a USB drive full of evidence that could either set me free or get me killed. I put the car in drive, pulled out onto Halsted Street, and headed north toward the courthouse. The sun was rising over the lake, turning the sky a pale, washed-out gold. It was going to be a long day, but I'd had long days before, and I was still standing. I arrived at the Cook County Courthouse at 8:15, parked in the public lot across the street, and walked through the morning crowds toward the towering glass and concrete building that had been the center of Chicago justice for as long as I could remember. I passed through security, emptied my pockets, keys, wallet, phone, and walked through the metal detector. The FBI badge and USB drive stayed hidden in my jacket's inner pocket. No one asked. No one searched. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, found courtroom 506, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The courtroom was already filling up. Natalie sat at the petitioner's table on the left, dressed in a charcoal blazer and white blouse, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Charles Mitchell sat beside her, shuffling papers, calm and confident. On the right side of the room, the respondent's table, my table, sat empty. I walked over, set my briefcase down, and took my seat. Alone. At 9 o'clock sharp, the bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Samuel Pierce presiding. The room rose as one. I stood, my hands resting on the table, and watched as the judge entered from a side door and took his seat behind the bench. He was older than I remembered, silver hair, deep lines around his eyes, but his posture was straight, his expression calm and measured. He didn't look at me. Not yet. Please be seated, he said. The room sat. Judge Pierce opened the file in front of him, scanned the first page, then looked up. This is the matter of Sullivan versus Sullivan, case number 2022-CH-04471, a petition for emergency conservatorship. Mr. Mitchell, you may proceed. Charles Mitchell stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the room. Thank you, Your Honor. Mitchell began, his voice smooth and practiced. This is a tragic case involving a father and daughter who both want what's best, but who disagree on what that means. My client, Natalie Sullivan, has watched her father, a man she loves, deeply deteriorate over the past several months. Memory loss, confusion, hallucinations. He has forgotten appointments, lost his keys in unusual places, and been found wandering the streets in the middle of the night. He gestured toward a stack of documents on his table. We have provided the court with medical testimony from Dr. Alan Prescott, a board-certified neurologist who has diagnosed Mr. Vernon Sullivan with early-stage dementia accompanied by paranoid hallucinations. We have witness statements from neighbors and colleagues who have observed his decline, and we have video evidence showing Mr. Sullivan disoriented and alone at 2:30 in the morning, unable to find his way home. Mitchell paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Your Honor, this is not about punishment. This is about protection. Mrs. Sullivan is asking this court for the authority to ensure her father receives the medical care and supervision he needs before he harms himself or someone else. He returned to his seat. Judge Pierce nodded. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Dr. Prescott, please take the stand. Dr. Alan Prescott stood, walked to the witness stand, and was sworn in. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and folded his hands in his lap. Mitchell approached him with a file folder. Dr. Prescott, can you please describe your professional qualifications? I'm a board-certified neurologist with over 20 years of experience. I specialize in cognitive disorders, including Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And have you examined the respondent, Vernon Sullivan? Yes. I conducted a comprehensive evaluation on March 21st of this year. What were your findings? Prescott opened the folder, glanced at his notes, and spoke with clinical precision. Mr. Sullivan exhibited significant short-term memory impairment. He was unable to recall simple word lists. His clock drawing test showed spatial disorientation. He reported experiencing vivid hallucinations of his deceased wife. In my professional opinion, Mr. Sullivan is suffering from early-stage dementia with paranoid features. And in your opinion, is he capable of managing his own affairs? No, Prescott said firmly. He is not. Mitchell nodded. Thank you, Doctor. No further questions. He returned to his seat, and Judge Pierce looked across the courtroom. Mr. Sullivan, you may cross-examine the witness. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. I walked toward the witness stand, stopped a few feet away, and looked at Dr. Prescott. He met my gaze, calm and confident. Dr. Prescott, I said, my voice steady. Did you conduct a toxicology screen during your examination? He blinked. I'm sorry. A toxicology screen. A test to determine if there were any foreign substances in my system. Drugs, medications, anything that could cause memory loss or hallucinations. Prescott shifted in his seat. And that's not standard procedure for a cognitive evaluation. But it's possible, isn't it, that someone experiencing sudden onset confusion and hallucinations could be suffering from drug-induced symptoms rather than dementia. It's possible, he admitted slowly, but unlikely. Unlikely, I repeated. Did you test for risperidone? His face went pale. I know, I did not. Risperidone is an antipsychotic medication, correct? One of its side effects includes confusion, memory impairment, and hallucinations. Yes. But, so if someone were being given risperidone without their knowledge, their symptoms might look identical to early-stage dementia, wouldn't they? Mitchell shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. Judge Pierce looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, Sustained. Mr. Sullivan, do you have evidence to support this line of questioning? I paused. Not yet. I'm working on obtaining it, Your Honor. Then move on. I nodded, stepped back, and returned to my table. Prescott looked rattled. Mitchell looked annoyed. And Natalie looked confused. Then Judge Pierce leaned forward, and for the first time since the hearing began, he looked directly at me. Really looked at me. I saw recognition flicker across his face just for a second, just a flash, and I knew he remembered. July 1998. Lakeshore Drive. A car wrapped around a light pole, the front end crumpled, smoke pouring from the engine. An 8-year-old girl trapped in the back seat, screaming. I'd been off duty driving home from a stakeout, and I'd pulled over without thinking, kicked in the window, pulled her out 30 seconds before the fuel tank ignited. Her name was Melissa Pierce, and the man sitting behind the bench staring at me right now was her father. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. The courtroom fell silent. He looked at me not as a judge looking at a respondent, but as a man looking at another man. Mr. Sullivan, he said slowly, his voice careful, measured, do you have anything you wish to say in your defense at this time? I stood. 47 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. Your Honor, I said quietly. I respectfully request additional time to prepare my defense. Mitchell stood immediately. Your Honor, this is an emergency petition. Mr. Sullivan has had 5 weeks to prepare. Judge Pierce held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Trust. Or maybe just the memory of a debt. Mr. Sullivan, he said carefully, how much time are you requesting? 1 week, Your Honor. Mitchell started to object again, but Pierce cut him off. 1 week, the judge said. We will reconvene on Monday, May 9th at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room exhaled. And as I gathered my papers and walked toward the door, I felt Judge Samuel Pierce's eyes on my back, and I knew he remembered. And that might be the only thing that saved me. At 10:15, after a brief recess, Judge Pierce called the court back to order. The room settled into an uneasy quiet. Mitchell stood, straightened his tie, and looked toward the petitioner's table. Your Honor, I'd like to call Natalie Sullivan to the stand. Natalie stood slowly, her hands trembling, and walked to the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat down, gripping the armrests like they were the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked small up there, fragile. Mitchell approached her with a gentle expression, the kind trial lawyers practice in front of mirrors. Miss Sullivan, he said softly, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court, in your own words, what you've observed over the past few months regarding your father's condition. Natalie nodded, swallowed hard, and looked down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He's not himself anymore, she said. My dad, he's always been sharp, always in control. But over the last few months, he's been different. He forgets things. He loses things. He called me one night at 2 a.m. because he couldn't remember where he parked his car. Her voice cracked. He told me he saw my mother. He said she was standing in his office talking to him. But my mom died 3 years ago. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I tried to help. I brought him groceries. I invited him to dinner. I begged him to see a doctor. And when he finally did, Dr. Prescott told me what I already knew, that my father is sick, that he needs help, and that if I don't do something, he's going to hurt himself. Mitchell let her words hang in the air for a moment, then said, And do you believe your father is capable of managing his own affairs at this time? Natalie looked up, her eyes red and swollen. No, she whispered. I don't. Thank you, Miss Sullivan. No further questions. Mitchell returned to his seat, and Judge Pierce looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, you may cross-examine. I stood, but I didn't move toward the witness stand. I just looked at Natalie. She looked back at me, her face pale, her hands still gripping the armrests. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to tell her about the risperidone, about Luca, about the USB drive sitting in my jacket pocket, with enough evidence to blow this whole thing apart. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not here. Ms. Sullivan, I said quietly, do you love your father? She blinked, surprised by the question. Of course I do. And you believe you're doing this to protect him? Yes. Even though it means taking away his freedom, his autonomy, his right to make decisions about his own life. Her jaw tightened. Yes. Because he's not capable of making those decisions anymore. I nodded slowly. Thank you. No further questions. I sat down. Mitchell looked confused. Judge Pierce looked thoughtful. And Natalie looked like she didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. Then something broke. Natalie stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor, her voice rising. You don't get it, do you? she said, her eyes locked on mine. You think this is about control, about money? It's not. It's about keeping you alive. Her voice cracked again, louder this time. You're sick, Dad. You're mentally ill, and you're a danger to yourself. And I'm not going to sit here and watch you disappear the way Mom did. The courtroom went silent. Every eye turned to her. Mitchell stood, Your Honor. But Judge Pierce held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at Natalie, then at me, his expression unreadable. Natalie was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. I can't lose you, she whispered. I can't. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost told her everything. But I didn't. Because if I did, Luca would know, and if Luca knew, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. Judge Pierce leaned forward, his hands folded on the bench. Miss Sullivan, he said gently, please sit down. Natalie sat wiping her face, trying to compose herself. The judge looked at me, then at her, then at the case file in front of him. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. This court recognizes the profound emotional weight of this case, he said carefully. It is clear to me that both parties are acting out of love and concern. However, the legal standard for conservatorship is high, and the respondent has raised questions that deserve further examination. He looked at Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, your case is compelling, but I am not prepared to make a final ruling today. Mitchell stood. Your Honor, this is an emergency petition. I understand that, Counselor. But Mr. Sullivan has requested additional time to prepare his defense, and I am inclined to grant it. He turned to me. Mr. Sullivan, you will have 1 week. We will reconvene on Monday, May 9th at 9 a.m. At that time, you will present your defense, and this court will make a final determination. Is that understood? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. Good. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The room exhaled. People stood, gathered their things, murmured to each other. Natalie sat frozen on the witness stand, staring at me. I didn't look away. For the first time in 3 months, I held her gaze. I wanted her to see me, really see me. Not the broken, confused man she thought I was, but the father who'd spent 26 years hunting criminals. The father who knew exactly what was happening. The father who was going to fix this. She was the one who looked away first. She stood, walked down from the witness stand, and followed Mitchell toward the door. As she passed my table, she paused for just a second, her eyes flicking toward me. And in that second, I saw it not just fear of losing me, but fear of what I might expose. She didn't just think I was sick. She was terrified I wasn't. And that scared her more than anything. She walked out of the courtroom, and I watched her go, my chest tight, my hands clenched at my sides. 1 week. That's all I had. 1 week to prepare for the fight that would either save her or destroy us both. 10 minutes after the hearing adjourned, a bailiff approached my table. Mr. Sullivan, he said quietly, Judge Pierce would like to see you in his chambers. I nodded, stood, and followed him through a side door down a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits of former judges and into a small wood-paneled office at the end of the corridor. Judge Pierce stood behind his desk, his robe already removed, his sleeves rolled up. He gestured to a chair across from him. Please sit. I sat. The bailiff closed the door behind me and we were alone. Pierce didn't sit. He stood there for a long moment, studying me, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. You're the agent who saved Melissa. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for 24 years. I never forgot your face. I never forgot what you did. But when I saw your name on the docket, I told myself it couldn't be the same man. Then I saw you in my courtroom, and I knew. He sat down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me. "So tell me, Agent Sullivan, what the hell is going on here?" I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the USB drive, and set it on his desk. "Your Honor, I'm not suffering from dementia. I'm being drugged, deliberately, by someone who wants me declared mentally incompetent so they can control my daughter and silence me." Pierce frowned. "Drugged with what?" "Risperidone, an antipsychotic. It causes confusion, memory loss, hallucinations, all the symptoms Dr. Prescott diagnosed me with. I had a sample of food tested by the FBI lab. The results came back positive." I tapped the USB drive. "It's all on here. Lab reports, surveillance footage, bank records, everything." Pierce picked up the drive, turned it over in his hand, then looked at me. "And who's behind this?" "A man named Luca Moretti. His father, Tony Moretti, was a crime boss I helped put away in 1999. Luca's been waiting 23 years for revenge. He found my daughter Natalie when she was vulnerable right after her divorce, and he's been blackmailing her, forcing her to launder money through her real estate company. She doesn't want to do it. She's terrified. But she doesn't have a choice." Pierce's jaw tightened. "And the conservatorship petition? It's part of his plan. If Natalie becomes my guardian, she controls my assets, my credibility, my freedom. And more importantly, I can't testify against him. I can't expose the money laundering operation. I become a crazy old man whose word means nothing." I leaned forward. "Your Honor, my daughter isn't a criminal. She's a victim. And if I don't stop Moretti, she's going to spend the rest of her life under his control, or worse." Pierce was silent for a long time. He set the USB drive down, steepled his fingers, and stared at it like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. "This is a serious accusation, Agent Sullivan," he said carefully. "If you're right, this is far bigger than a conservatorship case. This is organized crime, blackmail, conspiracy." "I know. And if you're wrong, if this is a paranoid delusion brought on by actual dementia, then I'm enabling a man who genuinely needs help." "I'm not wrong," I said quietly. "I know how this sounds. I know what it looks like. But I spent 35 years with the Bureau. I know the difference between reality and delusion. And I'm telling you, Your Honor, this is real." Pierce looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 24 years ago, you pulled my daughter out of a burning car. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask for anything in return. You just did it. And because of that, Melissa is alive today. She's a teacher now. Married. 2 kids. His voice tightened. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." He picked up the USB drive. "I'll look at this. And if what you're saying is true, I'll do everything in my power to help you. But understand this, Agent Sullivan, if you're wrong, I can't protect you. The law is the law, and I won't compromise my integrity even for the man who saved my daughter's life." "I understand," I said, "and I wouldn't ask you to." He stood. I stood. He extended his hand, and I shook it. "1 week," he said. "That's what I gave you. Use it wisely." The next morning, I drove to the FBI Chicago field office on West Roosevelt Road. Diane met me in the lobby at 8:30, led me through security, and took me upstairs to a windowless conference room on the 4th floor. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in names, dates, and financial transactions. A projector displayed a web of shell companies, all connected by thin red lines that eventually led back to one name, Luca Moretti. Diane closed the door behind us and gestured to a chair. "Sit," she said. "We've got a lot to cover." I sat. She pulled out a thick file folder and set it on the table between us. "Judge Pierce sent us the USB drive on Tuesday. We've been working around the clock since then. Vernon, what you gave him is a gold mine. 6 months of surveillance, bank records, intercepted communications. We've identified $72 million laundered through Morrison Development and 14 other shell companies over the past 3 years. I blinked. 72 million. That's just what we can trace. The real number is probably higher. She opened the folder and spread out a series of documents, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, corporate filings. Moretti's network is bigger than we thought. Morrison is just one piece. He's got real estate companies in 3 states, investment firms in the Caymans, and a dozen front businesses here in Chicago. She tapped one of the documents. Your daughter's company processed about $6 million annually. Not the biggest player, but critical to the operation. Without Morrison, the whole structure starts to collapse. Diane flipped to another page. We've prepared 47 arrest warrants. Moretti, his lieutenants, his accountants, his lawyers, and yes, Dr. Alan Prescott. I looked up. Prescott. He's been on Moretti's payroll for at least 2 years. We found payments $20,000 a month, routed through one of the shell companies. He's not just a corrupt doctor, Vernon. He's part of the conspiracy. She slid another document across the table. This is his phone record. 3 calls to a number registered to one of Moretti's associates in the week leading up to your conservatorship hearing. He didn't just diagnose you. He was following orders. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He tried to bury me. He tried, Diane said. But he failed. And when we execute these warrants, he's going down with the rest of them. She closed the folder. We're moving on Monday, right after the hearing. Once you go public with your FBI status and the evidence, once the judge rules in your favor, we'll have everything we need to move. Moretti won't see it coming. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the web of names on the whiteboard. What about Natalie? Diane's expression shifted. She looked uncomfortable. That's the hard part. Tell me. She sighed. Natalie is a key player in this operation. She signed off on every transaction. Her name is on the bank accounts, the corporate filings, the wire transfers. Even if she was coerced, even if she was blackmailed, the law doesn't care. She committed federal crimes. How much time? I asked quietly. If she doesn't cooperate, 5 to 10 years, maybe more depending on how the prosecutor feels. 5 to 10 years. My daughter, in a federal prison. Diane leaned forward. But if she cooperates, if she testifies against Moretti, if she helps us build the case, we can offer her a deal. Probation, supervised release, maybe some community service. No prison time. But she has to flip Vernon, and she has to do it fast. I closed my eyes. She doesn't even know I'm FBI. I know. She thinks I'm crazy. She thinks she's protecting me by taking away my freedom. I know. And when she finds out the truth, when she realizes I've been lying to her, investigating her, working with the Bureau this whole time, she's going to hate me. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, maybe. Or maybe she'll realize you were trying to save her. I looked at her. What if she doesn't want to be saved? Then you'll have done everything you could, Diane said. And that's all any parent can do. Over the next 3 days, I went over the plan 100 times. Diane walked me through the evidence, the timeline, the logistics. I practiced what I'd say in court, how I'd reveal my identity, how I'd present the USB drive, how I'd explain everything in a way that Judge Pierce could accept and Natalie could understand. On Friday afternoon, we had our final meeting. Diane, 2 other agents, and an assistant U.S. attorney named Christine Barnes. Barnes was sharp, no-nonsense, with short gray hair and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Mr. Sullivan, she said, shaking my hand. I've reviewed the evidence. It's solid. When you take the stand on Monday, we'll be ready to move. But I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Moretti has lawyers, good ones, and your daughter is going to be caught in the crossfire. I understand. Do you? Barnes leaned forward. Because once this starts, there's no going back. You can't protect her from this. The best you can do is give her a way out, and that means she has to choose to take it. I nodded. I know. Barnes studied me for a moment, then sat back. All right. Then we're ready. That night, Sunday night, the night before the final hearing, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I'd tried. I'd lain down at 11, closed my eyes, and willed myself to rest. But every time I did, I saw the courtroom, saw Natalie's face when I revealed the truth, saw the moment she realized her father wasn't sick. He was a federal agent who'd been investigating her. I got up at 2 a.m, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. The USB drive sat in front of me, 6 months of evidence compressed into a small piece of plastic, no bigger than my thumb. 26 years. That's how long I'd been hunting criminals, putting them away, making the world a little bit safer. And now the criminal I was hunting had my daughter in his grip, and I was about to set her free whether she wanted it or not. I picked up the USB drive, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and looked out the window at the dark Chicago skyline. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that courtroom and burn it all down. And I just hoped I hoped that when the smoke cleared, my daughter would still be standing, and that she'd understand why I did it. Before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, I need to hear from you. Do you think I made the right call? Will Natalie ever forgive me? Drop a comment. Let me know you're still here. Quick note: what follows contains fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If this isn't for you, feel free to stop here. But if you're ready, let's finish this. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, courtroom 506. The room was packed, more crowded than it had been the week before. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras at the ready. Word had gotten out that this wasn't just a conservatorship case anymore. This was something bigger. I sat at the respondents' table, hands folded in front of me, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Natalie sat across the aisle with Charles Mitchell, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. She hadn't looked at me once since I'd walked in. And in the third row of the gallery, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit and looking far too confident for a man who should have been nervous, sat Luca Moretti. He caught my eye and smiled, a small, knowing smile that said he thought he'd already won. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Samuel Pierce presiding. We rose. Judge Pierce entered, took his seat, and opened the case file in front of him. He looked at me, then at Natalie, then at Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, he said, does the petitioner wish to present any additional evidence before this court makes its ruling? Mitchell stood. No, Your Honor. We believe the evidence speaks for itself. Oh, very well. Mr. Sullivan, you requested 1 week to prepare your defense. You may proceed. I stood. This was it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my FBI badge, worn, faded, but still mine. I held it up so everyone in the courtroom could see it. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. My name is Vernon Sullivan, and I am a retired special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs. Someone in the back shouted a question. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel down. Order, order in this court! The room quieted, but the tension remained thick and electric. Natalie stared at me, her mouth open, her eyes wide with shock. Mitchell looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. and Luca Moretti. Luca's smile had vanished. Your Honor, I continued, I am not suffering from dementia. I have been deliberately drugged with risperidone, an antipsychotic medication, in an effort to discredit me and silence my investigation into a money laundering operation run by Luca Moretti. I gestured toward the gallery. Every head in the room turned. Luca sat frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on mine. Mr. Moretti has been blackmailing my daughter, Natalie Sullivan, forcing her to launder money through her real estate company, Morrison Development Group. Over the past 3 years, $72 million have been moved through Morrison and 14 other shell companies. My daughter is not a criminal. She is a victim. I turned back to Judge Pierce. Your Honor, I have evidence. 6 months of FBI surveillance, bank records, intercepted communications, and laboratory results proving that I was drugged. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and held it up. It's all here. Judge Pierce leaned forward. Mr. Sullivan, are you telling this court that you have been working undercover during these proceedings? Not undercover, Your Honor. I retired from the Bureau in 2020, but when I discovered my daughter was involved with Moretti, I contacted my former handler, Special Supervisory Agent Diane Foster. We've been building this case for 6 months. And Dr. Alan Prescott, the physician who diagnosed me with dementia, is on Moretti's payroll. $20,000 a month. He falsified my diagnosis to support this conservatorship petition. I looked at Prescott, who sat in the second row, his face ashen. He's part of the conspiracy. Mitchell shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Sullivan is clearly— Sit down, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Pierce said quietly. Mitchell sat. The judge looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, you're making very serious allegations. Do you have proof? Yes, Your Honor. I gestured toward the back of the courtroom. And so does the FBI. The doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Diane Foster walked in, flanked by 6 FBI agents in tactical vests, badges hanging from chains around their necks. The room went silent. Diane walked down the center aisle, her eyes locked on Luca Moretti. She stopped at his row and held up a folded document. To Luca Moretti, she said, her voice loud and clear. You are under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. 2 agents moved in on either side of him. Luca stood, his face twisted with rage. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Diane said calmly, as the agents pulled his arms behind his back and cuffed him. But anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. People stood, craned their necks, tried to get a better view. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel down again and again. Order, order. Diane turned toward the second row. Dr. Alan Prescott, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. Prescott tried to stand, tried to run, but 2 agents were already on him. They cuffed him, pulled him to his feet, and led him toward the door. Luca was dragged past my table, still struggling, still shouting. As he passed me, he turned his head and spat. You think you've won? You think this is over? She's going down with me, old man. Your daughter's going to prison. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and said quietly, No, she's not. The agents pulled him away. The doors closed behind them. The room was still buzzing, still chaotic, but slowly, it began to settle. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel one final time. This court will come to order. The noise died down. Everyone sat, and in the sudden heavy silence, I looked across the aisle at Natalie. She was sitting perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She stared at me like she didn't know who I was, like I was a stranger. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. "Ms. Sullivan," he said gently, "do you have anything you wish to say in response to these allegations?" Natalie didn't speak. Not at first. She sat there staring down at her hands, her shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face. The courtroom was silent, waiting. Judge Pierce didn't rush her. He just sat there patient, his expression gentle, and let the silence stretch. Finally, Natalie looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to say, Your Honor." "Take your time," Pierce said quietly. She wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and then looked across the aisle at me. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Are you really FBI?" I nodded. "Yes." "And you've been investigating me this whole time?" "Not investigating you," I said carefully. "Investigating the man who was using you." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't understand. I thought you were sick. I thought I was losing you." "You weren't losing me, Nat. I was trying to save you." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned back to Judge Pierce. "Your Honor, I need to tell you something." Judge Pierce leaned forward. "Go ahead, Miss Sullivan." Natalie's hands were trembling. She folded them in her lap, took another breath, and spoke. "My father is telling the truth. Luca Moretti has been blackmailing me for 2 years. After my divorce, I was in a bad place. Financially, emotionally. I made some mistakes. I signed some contracts I shouldn't have signed. I didn't know they were illegal at the time. I was desperate, and Luca seemed like he was helping me. But then he showed me a video of me signing those documents. And he told me if I didn't do what he said, he'd send it to the FBI. He'd ruin me." Her voice cracked. "So I did what he told me. I moved money through my company. I didn't ask questions. I did it. Because I was terrified." She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "And then Dad started acting strange, forgetting things, seeing things. And I thought he was really sick. I didn't know he was being drugged. I didn't know Luca was behind it. I just thought my father was dying and I had to protect him." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad." Judge Pierce gave her a moment, then spoke. "Miss Sullivan, I want you to understand something." He looked at me, then back at her. 24 years ago, your father saved my daughter's life. Her name is Melissa. She was 8 years old. There was a car accident on Lakeshore Drive, a terrible accident. The car was on fire, and Melissa was trapped in the back seat. Your father was off duty. He didn't have to stop. But he did. He kicked in the window, pulled her out, and carried her to safety 30 seconds before the fuel tank exploded. The courtroom was silent. Everyone was listening. If Vernon Sullivan hadn't been there that day, Pierce continued, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter would be dead, and because of him, she's alive. She's a teacher now. She's married. She has 2 beautiful children. He looked at me, and I saw gratitude in his eyes, gratitude that had been sitting there unspoken for 24 years. So when this case came across my desk and I saw his name, I didn't recognize it at first. But when I saw him in my courtroom, I knew. And when he came to my chambers and showed me the evidence, I believed him. Because Vernon Sullivan is not a man who lies. He's not a man who breaks. And he is certainly not a man suffering from dementia. Judge Pierce looked back at Natalie. Your father has been fighting for you this entire time, Ms. Sullivan, and I am hereby dismissing this petition for conservatorship. Vernon Sullivan is of sound mind and sound body, and he does not require a guardian. The gavel came down. Case dismissed. The courtroom exhaled. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. But I didn't care about any of that. I was looking at Natalie, and she was looking at me, and for the first time in months I saw something other than fear in her eyes. I saw relief. Judge Pierce cleared his throat. However, Ms. Sullivan, there is still the matter of your involvement in Mr. Moretti's operation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Barnes, would you like to address the court? Christine Barnes stood from her seat in the gallery and walked to the front of the room. She was calm, professional, her voice clear. Your Honor, the United States recognizes that Ms. Sullivan was coerced into participating in this criminal enterprise. We do not believe she is a mastermind or a willing participant. However, she did commit federal crimes, and there must be accountability. She turned to Natalie. Miss Sullivan, the government is prepared to offer you a deal. If you agree to cooperate fully, if you testify against Luca Moretti and provide evidence regarding his operation, we will recommend probation, supervised release, and community service. No prison time. But you must agree to cooperate, and you must do so now. Natalie looked at me. I nodded. She looked back at Barnes. I'll do it, she whispered. I'll cooperate. Barnes nodded. Then we have an agreement. Judge Pierce addressed Natalie one more time. Ms. Sullivan, a court officer will escort you to meet with federal prosecutors. You will provide a full statement, and you will be assigned legal counsel to assist you through this process. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time. The courtroom began to empty. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Mitchell gathered his papers and left without a word, and Natalie stood slowly, unsteadily, and walked toward the side door where a court officer was waiting. But before she reached it, she stopped. She turned and looked at me one last time. Her eyes were red, swollen, but there was something else there now. A flicker of hope. Dad, she said quietly, her voice breaking. Thank you. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for what? For destroying the life she'd built, for exposing her to federal prosecutors, for putting her in a position where she had no choice but to betray the man who'd been controlling her, or for saving her from him. I just nodded. She held my gaze for another second, then turned and walked through the door. It closed behind her with a soft click, and my daughter was gone. Again. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, it was over. I sat across from Diane Foster in a small interview room at the FBI Chicago field office, the same room where we'd planned this operation weeks ago. She set a file folder on the table between us and opened it. 47 arrests. She said, her voice calm but satisfied. Executed simultaneously at 2 p.m. across Chicago, the suburbs, and 3 other states. Luca Moretti, Dr. Alan Prescott, Moretti's lieutenants, his accountants, his lawyers, his shell company executives. We got all of them. She slid a document across the table. $72 million in assets have been seized. Bank accounts, real estate, luxury vehicles, offshore holdings. The U.S. Attorney's Office is working with the IRS to trace additional funds, but this is a significant blow to Moretti's operation. I looked at the list of names. Some I recognized. Most I didn't. But they were all connected to Luca. All part of the machine that had tried to destroy me and enslave my daughter. What's Moretti facing? I asked. Diane didn't hesitate. Life in prison. The charges include money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, witness, tampering, and attempted fraud. With his prior record and the scope of this operation, the sentencing guidelines put him at life without parole. He's done, Vernon. He'll never see daylight again. I nodded slowly. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. But it didn't feel like victory. It just felt empty. Diane closed the folder and looked at me. Natalie's cooperating fully. She's been with Assistant U.S. Attorney Barnes all afternoon giving a statement. She's providing names, dates, transactions, everything we need to build an airtight case against Moretti. And her sentence? I asked quietly. 3 years of supervised probation, 1,000 hours of community service, no prison time. As long as she complies with the terms of her agreement and testifies when the trial comes, she'll walk away clean. Well, as clean as she can be. Diane leaned forward. Vernon, she's lucky. Without your intervention, without the evidence you gathered, she'd be looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. You saved her. I looked down at my hands. Then why doesn't it feel like it? Diane was quiet for a moment. Because you're her father, she said gently. And you had to hurt her to save her. That's not something that feels good. It just feels necessary. I nodded. She was right. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. What happens now? I asked. Moretti's arraignment is scheduled for Friday. The trial will probably start in 6 to 8 months. Natalie will be called to testify. And you'll probably be called as a witness too to explain the investigation, the drugging, the conservatorship attempt. This isn't over yet, Vernon. But the hardest part is... She stood, extended her hand. You did good work. Elizabeth would be proud. I shook her hand, managed a weak smile. Thanks, Diane. Go home, she said. Get some rest. You've earned it. But I didn't go home. Not right away. I drove around the city for a while, aimless, watching Chicago move past my windows like it always had, indifferent, relentless, beautiful, in its own hard way. I thought about calling Natalie, but I didn't know what I'd say. I'm sorry I love you. I hope you don't hate me. None of it felt right. So I just drove, and eventually I ended up back at my apartment in Pilsen. I parked on the street, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Quiet, still, empty. I turned on the light. The walls were lined with things I'd accumulated over 64 years, photos of Elizabeth-framed drawings Natalie had made when she was a kid, a bookshelf full of case files and true crime novels I'd never finished. Everything looked the same. But everything had changed. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water I didn't drink, and stood there staring at the refrigerator. There was a drawing Natalie had made when she was 7, a crayon picture of our family. Me, Elizabeth, and Natalie standing in front of a house with a lopsided sun overhead. She'd written in big, crooked letters at the bottom, "My family." I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to the living room, sat down on the couch, and let myself feel it. All of it. The exhaustion, the relief, the grief, the loneliness. I'd won the case. I'd saved my daughter. I'd taken down a criminal empire. So why did it feel like I'd just lost everything? I sat there in the gathering darkness, still wearing my navy suit, still holding the glass of water in my hand, and stared at nothing. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what came next. Tomorrow, I'd start rebuilding whatever was left of my relationship with Natalie. Tomorrow, I'd try to make sense of it all. But tonight, I just needed to sit in this silence and let myself feel the weight of what I'd done. Because I'd saved her. But I didn't know if she'd ever forgive me. And I didn't know if I'd ever forgive myself for the things I'd had to do to make it happen. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, I sat alone in the dark. And for the first time in 26 years, I didn't know what the hell I was supposed to do next. 3 years later, I stood outside the Cook County Probation Office on a Monday morning in May, my hands in my pockets, watching the doors. It was 10 o'clock. The sun was out. The air smelled like spring, fresh and clean, the way Chicago only smells a few weeks out of the year. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but I wasn't calm either. The door opened and Natalie walked out. She was 39 now, her hair a little shorter, her face a little older. She wore jeans, a gray sweater, and a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She stopped when she saw me, surprised. "Dad." "Hey, kiddo," I said. She walked over slowly, cautiously, like she wasn't sure if I was real or if this was some kind of dream. "What are you doing here?" "Thought you might want a ride," I said. She stared at me for a long moment, then smiled, just a small, tentative smile. But it was the first real one I'd seen from her in 3 years. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'd like that." We walked to my car in silence. I opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in. I got in on the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled out onto the street. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Natalie broke the silence. "I finished," she said. 3 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service. All done." "I know," I said. "How does it feel?" She thought about it. "Strange. Like I'm waiting for someone to tell me I messed up, that I have to do it all over again. But I didn't. I'm free." "You are." She looked at me. "I'm working now. Did you know that?" I nodded. "Diane told me." "Director of Housing Services at a shelter in Uptown. I help people find permanent housing, connect them with resources, get them back on their feet." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "It's not glamorous, but it's real. And it matters." "It does," I said. "I'm proud of you." She looked away out the window. "I testified, Dad, at Luca's trial 2 years ago. I told them everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every lie. I know. They gave him 30 years. He'll be 75 when he gets out. If he gets out." "Good," I said. We drove in silence for a few more blocks. Then Natalie spoke again, her voice softer now. "I'm sorry." I glanced at her. "For what?" "For not believing you. For thinking you were sick. For trying to take your freedom away." Her voice cracked. "For everything." I pulled the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned to face her. "Natalie," I said gently, "I forgave you a long time ago." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But I hurt you. I tried to have you declared mentally incompetent. I almost destroyed you." "You were scared," I said. "You were being manipulated by a man who spent 2 years convincing you that you had no way out. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. And you were trying to protect me. Even if you were wrong about how you were right about why." I reached over and took her hand. "You're my daughter. I would have done anything to save you. And I did. And I'd do it again." She broke down, then sobbing into her hands, and I just sat there holding her hand, letting her cry. After a few minutes, she wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and looked at me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand. "Never." We sat there for a moment longer. Then I put the car back in drive and pulled onto the road. We drove through the city, past the Loop, past Lincoln Park, past the neighborhoods I'd patrolled for 26 years. Chicago stretched out in front of us, loud and messy and full of second chances. Natalie sat beside me, looking out the window. She was different now. quieter, steadier, scarred, but healing. And so was I. I thought about Elizabeth, about how much she would have loved to see this, her daughter, free, starting over. I thought about Judge Pierce, who'd given me the chance to save Natalie when he could have just dismissed me as a paranoid old man. I thought about Diane, who'd believed me when no one else did. And I thought about the last 3 years, the calls, the visits, the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. It hadn't been easy. It still wasn't. But we were here. We were trying. "Dad," Natalie said quietly. "Yeah. Thank you for not giving up." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time I felt something other than grief or anger or exhaustion. I felt hope. "Never harm," I said. We drove toward the horizon, father and daughter, not perfect, not healed, but together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And to you listening to this story, remember this: God gave me a second chance when I thought I'd lost everything. When I sat in that dark apartment after the trial, broken and alone, I prayed for the first time in years. I didn't ask for victory, I'd already won the case. I asked for my daughter's heart, and 3 years later he answered. Not in the way I expected, but in the way we both needed. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I spent 26 years chasing criminals, convinced I was protecting my family by keeping the world safe. But I forgot the most important truth. The people you love need your presence, not just your protection. I missed choir concerts. I missed college tours. I missed the quiet moments that build trust. And when my daughter needed me most, when Luca Moretti found her vulnerable and afraid, she didn't come to me. Because I'd taught her that work always came first. Don't be like me. Don't let your career, your mission, or your pride steal the time you have with the people who matter. Because one day you'll look up and they'll be gone. And no amount of justice, no courtroom victory, no criminal behind bars will fill that emptiness. I learned that family betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. When Natalie stood in that courtroom and called me mentally ill, it wasn't just a legal strategy. It was the result of years of distance I'd created. Family betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It's built slowly through missed calls, broken promises, and the silent message that something else is always more important. And when family betrayal finally arrives, it's devastating. But here's what I also learned: betrayal can be healed. Not easily, not quickly. But it can be healed if both people are willing to fight for it. These grandpa stories aren't just about old men and courtroom dramas. These grandpa stories are about choices, the ones we make when we're young, and the consequences we live with when we're old. These grandpa stories are warnings, blessings, and second chances wrapped in wrinkled skin and tired voices. So listen carefully. If you found this story meaningful, please leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose between justice and family? How did you handle it? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel for more real-life lessons like this one. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I know this story was long, and I know it wasn't easy to hear. But some truths are worth the wait. Before I go, a quick disclaimer: the stories you'll hear on this channel contain fictionalized elements crafted for educational and inspirational purposes. If this content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better suit your preferences. But if you're ready for the next chapter, I'll be here waiting to share another lesson life taught me the hard way. God bless you. And remember, it's never too late to come home.